what we're going to look at is this is going through, it's a long timeline of what has happened to Native Americans. If we look back in colonization, we know the Aztecs come in, right? The Aztecs are taken down by Pizarro and Cortez, and the Incas are taken down, right? We see that they're also taken down by disease. And then we see the Puritans come in, right? And the Puritans try to do what with them first? Purify them, Christianize them. Do they do that? Then we have tons of battles and they're removed, right? We have the French and Indian War. We had the Indian side with the French and the Americans, right? And we see the Iroquois win. Then we have these battles with them where they agree that they will move off that land as long as they're what? Paid money. Then we get the Louisiana Purchase, right? We're going to inherit a lot more Indians. And what we're going to see is these battles. Lewis and Clark are going to be helped by Sacagawea to go through this area and get to Washington. We're going to see the Battle of Tecumseh and Prophet against William Harrison. William Harrison defeats them. We get the War of 1812 with the Indians, right? We still dominate this area, and who can't they trade with anymore? The British. And so now Jackson invades Florida. We know that the Indians were going crazy there. Jackson invades Florida to get back slaves, to get back Seminole Indians. And this is how we gain what state? Florida, and we lose what? Texas. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is this last little part. What happens to Native Americans that puts them in their modern day Trail of Tears, Oklahoma? Yes, you should have a reading. You should have a reading that you picked up. Do you see the side with the little guy on it? All right, I'm going to read this to you to explain what is happening from here all the way this way. Okay? And I'll read it to you, and then we'll get through the last stuff of going to Texas, getting Texas, and 1836, 1830. Okay? Hooray. We'll get to something happier, Texas. Okay, we're going to get very sad today with the Indians. We got sad with the bank, right? Because by removing that money, how did it depress America? Financially, our economy went in the gutter, right? Now we're going to look what's going to happen to Native Americans, and we're going to be very sad. I'm sorry, the first 2/3 of this lesson is very sad, and then we'll get to Texas. Okay? So, do you, yes. Okay, so do y'all see where it says Indian removal? Do y'all see where it says Indian removal? Yeah. That's where we're going to start reading. It says, in response to a request by Jackson, Congress in 1830 approved the Indian Removal Act, which is the first thing on our timeline. It appropriated $500,000 for this purpose. Jackson's presidency saw some 94 removal treaties negotiated. By 1935, he was able to announce the policy had been carried out with the process of completion for all but a handful of Indians. The policy was effected in remarkable speed, but in event, even that was too slow for the authorities of the South and Southwest. Unlike the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes region, the flow of white settlement had constantly pushed the Indians westward before it. The Old Southwest settlement moved across Kentucky, Tennessee, and down to Mississippi, sounding our civilized tribes, which we talked about in our study guide, the Creeks, the Choctaws, Chickasaws, and Seminoles, and Cherokees. These tribes over the years had taken many features of white society. The Cherokees had such apprehensions of white civilization, such as the Constitution, a written language, and black slaves. Most of the northern tribes were too weak to resist the offers of the Indian commissioners, who, if necessary, used bribery and alcohol to woo chiefs. And there was, on a whole, remarkable little resistance. In Illinois and Wisconsin territories, an armed clash sprang up in April to August of 1832, which became known as the Black Hawk War. So it's one of the next things on earth. When the Sauk and the Fox and their chief Black Hawks sought to reoccupy some of the lands that they had abandoned in the previous year. Facing famine and hostility, the Sioux, west of the Mississippi, were simply seeking a place to raise a crop. The Illinois militia mobilized to expel them. They chased them into Wisconsin territory and massacred women and children as they tried to escape into Mississippi. The Black Hawk War became to be remembered later, however less because of the atrocities inflicted on the Indians than because of the participants included 2 native Kentuckians later pitted against each other. Lieutenant Jefferson Davis of the Regular Army, which you'll see him later in the Civil War, and Abraham Lincoln of Illinois Volunteers. The 2 nations, the Seminoles and the Cherokees, put up stubborn resistance. The Seminoles of Florida fought a protracted guerrilla war in the Everglades from 35 to 42, but most of the vigor went out in the resistance in 1837 when their leader, Osceola, was sieged by treachery under a flag of truce, imprisoned and left to die in Fort Moultrie near Charleston Harbor. After 1842, a few hundred Seminoles remained, hiding out in swamps. Most of them had been banished to the west. So which area do we have more trouble with, Indians, in the north or the south?
South.
Okay, so this is going to lead us to the Trail of Tears, but we're going to look at a couple of cases first. The Cherokees and the Trail of Tears. The Cherokees had, by the end of the 18th century, fallen back into the mountains of northern Georgia and North Carolina into land guaranteed to them by 1791 by a treaty with the United States. Do they have a contract? Yes. Can we break contracts? No. If you sign something, that is yours. So is this land theirs?
Yes.
So it says, but Georgia ceded its western lands in 1802, did so on an ambiguous condition that the United States shall extinguish all Indian titles within the state as early as the same can be obtained on reasonable terms. So is Georgia trying to change that contract? Can they change a contract? No. So who's still entitled to their land? The Indians. It says in 1827, the Cherokees, relying on their treaty rights, adopted a constitution which they declared pointedly that they were not subjects to any other state or nation. So do the Cherokees have to follow U.S. laws? No. And this is why if you ever look at Oklahoma, what do we see in Oklahoma? A lot of casinos, are they on American land or Indian land? And they're on Indian land because are they subject to any other state or nation's laws? No, that's why gambling's there, because in a lot of their constitutions, they're going to say they do not have to adhere to U.S. law. In 1828, Georgia responded with a law stipulating that after June 1st, 1830, the authority of the slate law would extend over Cherokees living within the boundaries of that state. Can a state say, if you're living in my borders, Indians, you have to follow my laws? No. So the discovery of gold in 1828 whetted the whites' appetite for Cherokee lands, and they brought bands of rough prospectors into the country. The Cherokee sought relief in the Supreme Court, but in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, John Marshall ruled that the court lacked jurisdiction because the Cherokees were a domestic dependent nation. Highlight that. So highlight Cherokee Nation and domestic dependent nation. So could the Supreme Court even rule on what was going on in their land? No. He had no jurisdiction. Do y'all get what jurisdiction is?
Yes.
Miss Verdine's going at 100 miles an hour down 287. The Waxahachie PD is chasing me down. I get to Midlothian. Can they arrest me in Midlothian? No, because do they have jurisdiction?
No.
So this is what the Supreme Court's saying here. That they don't have any jurisdiction over Indian land. Can they interpret their laws? No, because these nations are domestic dependent. That means they are distinct, independent communities. So do y'all get that? They're these communities. Do they have to adhere to federal government laws? So can the police go in there and say, oh, she's gambling, she's underage. Can the police go into those casinos? No. So if you ever been into one of those casinos, they have their own police force, right? Because does the state of Oklahoma have any authority of what's going on? No. Yes?
So can't the FBI go in there?
They can't. Because does the FBI have any jurisdiction? So if the FBI wanted to go in, do they need to talk to that Indian tribe?
Yeah.
And if the Indian tribe gives them permission, do they have it now?
Yeah.
Just like if the U.S. were to go into Mexico saying, hey, there's a criminal here, we need to come and get him. Can the U.S. actually go in? No, they have to seek permission from that nation. So do y'all see that they're living within our borders, right? But are they independent?
Yes.
Yes, that's what it means to be a domestic dependent nation. They're dependent on the U.S. to honor that treaty, right? But do they have rights of their own? So a domestic dependent nation is a distinct, independent political community. Whose rules rule there? Is it the U.S. or is it the Indian community? Indian community. So they're a domestic dependent nation rather than a foreign state in the meaning of the Constitution. Marshall added, however, the Cherokees had an unquestionable right. What does that mean? What do they have if they have an unquestionable right? It's theirs, no doubt, because they have what? They have, what do they have? They have a contract. They have a piece of paper that says this land is theirs. Can anybody take it away? No. They have a piece of paper saying that this is theirs. So the Cherokees had an unquestionable right. So should have anybody ever moved them? No. They have an unquestionable right to their lands until it should be extinguished by a voluntary secession. So could they possibly lose their land? Yes, but what did they have to sign? Another contract. Is that land theirs? Because they have what? Okay, they could lose their land if they did what? This is why these contracts are really important. So Marshall's saying, whose land is theirs? Is it the U.S. or is it the Indians? He says the Indians, this is their land. Should anybody forcefully move them? No. If they want to move themselves and they sign a new contract, can they move? Okay, so in 1830, a Georgia law required that whites in the territory get license authorizing their residency there and take an oath of allegiance to the state. 2 New England missionaries amongst the Indians refused and were sentenced to 4 years of hard labor. On their appeal to the Supreme Court in Worcester versus Georgia, the court held the Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community. Within Georgia, law had no force. So can Georgia put rules over Indian lands? No. So these guys who wanted to go there, did they really need to get a license to go there? No. So the Georgia law was therefore unconstitutional. Who have they sided with? Georgia or the Indians?
Indians.
Cherokee Nation, who did they side with? Georgia or the Indians? Indians. They have rights to their land, and can anybody tell them what to do on their land? No, the Indians have rights. So 6 years earlier, Georgia had faced down President Adams when he tried to protect the rights of the Creeks. Now Georgia and the Supreme Court, with the same tacit consent, was another president. Jackson is supposed to have said privately, Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it. So do you think Jackson wants to follow Cherokee and Worcester?
No.
No. He says no, because what has been found on that land? Gold. What are we about to get into that he realizes he kind of wasted a lot of gold? The bank, because where did he took the money out of the bank, the gold, and moved it where?
Into the States.
Does he need to get this gold?
Yes.
If we get this gold, where does it get put in? Banks. And what does it allow for our economy to do? Grow. So do you think Jackson wants to listen to Cherokee Nation and Worcester? It stands in his way of getting to the what? Gold. So he says, whether he not put it so bluntly, Jackson did nothing to enforce the decision. In the circumstances, there was nothing left to do but the Cherokees to give up and sign a treaty. Are they violating their own contract when they sign this treaty? Did they have to? No, but what does Jackson want? The gold, because he needs the gold to get where? Into the bank system to get in our money supply. So they exchanged this. They wrote this treaty. They gave up their lands in the southeast in exchange for tracts in Indian Territory west of Arkansas for $5 million from the federal government and the expense of transportation. By 1838, the Cherokees had departed on the Trail of Tears, westward following the Choctaws, Chickasaws, Creeks, and Seminoles on a journey marked by cruelty and neglect of the soldiers and private contractors, and the scorn and pillage by, because think about it, they're walking and they have all their possessions. Can someone attack them and take all their stuff? So as they're walking to Oklahoma with all their things, they're getting attacked by white settlers and their stuff is being taken from them. Who's supposed to be protecting them? The military, the government. Do you think they do that? No. So this is why it's so sad. Did they have rights to that land in Cherokee and Worcester? Yes. But what bad event has happened to our government that they need them to get off that land? The destruction of the bus. What has been found on their land? Gold. By removing them and forcing them to sign that treaty, what can our government get the hands on? Gold, which will help our... And this is why the Trail of Tears happens. I'm sorry. I told you it was going to be another sad moment in U.S. history. Okay. I've just...